This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Chaos. The world is devolving around us. Is it just a representation of disorder, or is chaos a supernatural entity, the first and oldest enemy of God? That's this week on A View from the Bunker. Who would have thought just a few years ago we'd find ourselves in a world where refusing an experimental medicine could keep you from traveling, going to the store, or even cost you your job? Actually, we did. My novel, The God Conspiracy, was published last year when it suddenly became much more relevant than it had been when I started writing it more than 15 years ago. And I drew on characters and ideas developed by Sharon a few years earlier for her novel, The Armageddon Strain. We'd like to make The God Conspiracy available to you as part of our special offer during the month of August. It's a fast-moving story of people, ordinary people, who find themselves in circumstances beyond their control. And the only ones who really understand what's going on are those who see that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. During the month of August, we'll send you The God Conspiracy and 12 hours of video teachings. Our 2 DVD sets, Unmasking the Ancient Gods and This Is War. 4 discs in all, 12 hours of video teachings. A retail value altogether of $120 for just $35 plus shipping and handling. This offer is only available during the month of August and only at our store. Available online at gilberthouse.org. Here in the United States especially, but really all over the world the last couple of years, chaos has reigned supreme. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Thank you for listening or watching. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GilbertHouse. If you would take a moment, click the little button, subscribe, and share this link around with your friends. Help us to grow. We sure appreciate your help. Is chaos a literal entity, an enemy of God? It's mentioned often enough in the Bible, but is just a symbol. Is it just a symbol of supernatural disorder? That's the topic for this month's Iron and Myth discussion. So we welcome back to our panel, the author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, Conspiracy Theory, and Angel of the Lord, a biblical, historical, and theological study, pastor of Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder. We welcome Doug Van Dorn, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, award-winning author, screenwriter, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter, author of several series that we recommend: Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, and nonfiction books that are the theological foundation for his fiction: When Giants Were Upon the Earth, When Watchers Ruled the Nations, God Against the Gods. You'll find him online at Godawa.com. Brian Godawa, and our friendly neighborhood PhD, the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology and author of Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, Dr. Judd Burton. Fellas, welcome back, and thanks for joining us tonight. Depending on how you define chaos as just a representation of disorder, or, well, I guess that'll be the focus of the conversation, or whether it's an actual spiritual entity, things have been looking pretty chaotic here in the United States these last couple of years. Brian, you got to, just off the front here, I want to tease this because I think this is going to blow up here. I've got a feeling that you're going to be the center of a lot of attention in a couple of weeks. You got a project that is going to attract a lot of attention your way here soon, and kind of deals with some of the political chaos we've been dealing with. What's coming out here, and when is it? When and where can we watch it?
Okay, I'll try to make this quick, although it is relevant to our discussion today because it is about chaos. But so I've written a movie that has been made and is going to be released about Hunter Biden's laptop. And it's not a documentary. It's actually a political satire that's kind of in the vein of The Wolf of Wall Street or The Big Short or Vice. Some of these movies, the political movies, where they sort of break the boundaries and try to make some gags while communicating a lot of serious information. And, of course, I'm doing that on Hunter Biden's laptop. And I do want to warn everybody. So it's going to be coming out at this point, the date, as far as I know, it may change, but it's August 17th. It's going to be premiered on Breitbart.com streaming. So you'll want to go there. Now, I went to Breitbart just the other day, and they still don't have anything up about it yet, so you'll just have to keep checking. And, if you go to if you sign up at my website, I will tell people when it does actually for sure open up. But I do want to warn everybody too. It's rated R, so there's drug use, some cussing, and some, sort of risque, images and stuff. No nudity, but a lot of risque sort of images because that was Hunter Biden's life. But everything I do is invested with a Christian worldview, so the context should be very interesting as you watch it. But it's a political satire, so get ready for some jabs and jokes. But also, it wasn't. I'll leave with this: is that our goal was to humanize Hunter Biden. He's a very sad and tragic character, and we did not seek to do what Hollywood would do against, a conservative. They mock them, make them look foolish and stupid and bad and all this kind of stuff. Just ridiculous, right? No, we wanted to actually try to understand his humanity and his struggle as an addict, but also his family relationship, which we think is very much crucial, a crucial part of his choices in life. A very sort of close yet dysfunctional family relationship with his father and with his dead brother Bo that they had in the past. So we deal a little bit with that, and that brings a sense of humanity to him, even though we do show the truth about a lot of stuff that's being revealed right now, actually. So it's very, very timely.
Some of the stuff that's come out that's been reported by the Daily Mail in the UK, which reports more American politics than most of the U.S. news outlets, has been very tragic. It is heartbreaking when you see what this guy's going on. You can't use that to condone what he's done. A lot of us go through stuff, but boy, yeah, you're right. I think this is a fellow who's got family issues, to say the least. So, yeah.
And even Joe Biden, too. We deal with him, and we have some great little jabs, but, we're not making him look like – we deal with some of his mental incapacities, but we don't mock and, make these extended jokes about being a senile, demented man, because he wasn't as bad in December 2019 when the story takes place. But we do have, of course, we do have some playful jokes that I think people would enjoy. It's not – like I said, it's not hardcore mockery like you get out of Hollywood. It's more just a sort of playful satire.
Yeah. Well, as you say, if we hear on the news that there's been a raid on the Gadawa home by the FBI, we'll know why. Oh, brother. Well, chaos. Judd, let me throw this to you, and Brian, we'll get back to you here because you've been really woven chaos as a character into a number of your novels, which is really impressive. Most of us think of chaos as a force of nature, but Judd, how do you read it as a Bible scholar? What do you see? How is chaos described? And are we dealing with just a representation of disorder, or is this is this a supernatural entity?
I don't see any reason why it can't be qualified or quantified as both. Because the entity, of course, using the medium of what's available in the material and supernatural world. And I think that's borne out pretty, I don't think that would come as a huge shock to any serious student of the Bible. There are any number of passages that we could reference, in that respect. But there's some interesting themes I think that we'll be able to dig into with this, particularly regarding bodies of water and chaos monsters and those kinds of things, and the significance of water for the underworld, and not just the ancient Near East, but in fact all over the globe. So this is going to be a fun one, I think. Given not that the other six were not fun, but that's we'll be able to, if you'll pardon the pun, take a deep dive into the chaos sea tonight with these sort of mythological themes that run through the idea of chaos. So I'm really excited. I feel like even though I'm still recovering, I feel like Jim Bowie at the Battle of the Alamo. I'm not saying I'm going down, but I'm ready. I'm in my bed and I have my pistols cocked and loaded. So Right through the door. Just call me Jim Bowie.
There we go.
But here we go.
All right, Doug, you were the first to report on this serpent-shaped mound in Bashan. And one of the things that we've learned over the past few years is that that serpent and that name, Bashan, serpent, the cognate term in Akkadian Bashmu, was the name given to a seven-headed chaos monster that had to be defeated by a warrior god, Ninurta or Tishbak in another story. What is your take on this? What do you see when you look at the Bible and read these depictions of Rahab, Leviathan, or the sea?
Well, it's a pretty open-ended question there, Derek.
I try not to ask yes/no questions.
There's so much going on. The overlap of Leviathan with Egypt is an interesting thing to me, how you have this God calling Egypt at the time of Moses in the Red Sea, likening to the Leviathan, which is the chaos monster, this monster in the sea that I know Brian has written so much about and does such a great job personifying. You know, where I think it's Jesus writing on the back of the Leviathan in one of the books.
I think that's probably my one unique thing that I came up with that I haven't seen anyone else think of. So
I absolutely love that. When I read that, I was like, "That's the coolest thing ever, man." One of the things that I was struck by, kind of when I first started diving into the Watcher stuff and looking at some of the family trees of the different genealogies of the nation's gods. I didn't know this, so might be new to some other people. You know, you look into to Zeus and where he comes from, and you see that he comes from the Titans, and then you look back at the Titans and say, well, where in the world do they come from? And you find that they come from this union of Gaia and Uranus, heaven and earth, which is very Nephilim kind of language. And then you look at, I mean, you're getting back to the primordial gods here in the Greek pantheon, and you go back and find out, well, where does Gaia come from? There's only just a handful of these primordial gods, and they all come from this god Chaos. And Homer is kind of the first one to talk about Chaos as the very top of the pantheon. I was struck by that you know, I would think about a modern guy like Carl Sagan saying that the cosmos is all there ever is and was and ever will be. And like, where does this come from? It's the atheist modern view of the origin of things is so similar in some ways to the origin of the gods of Greece that it all just comes from this chaotic whatever it is, except for, and I think this gets to your question a little bit that you asked to Judd. When we're talking about chaos in a Greek mythology, we can't just say that this is like naturalism, like a Carl Sagan would, because this is the family tree of gods. And so somehow this chaos god at the top has to be related, at least, you know, theologically in their mind, to the other gods that come after it. I just thought that's so, like, I'd never heard anybody talk about that before. And, you know, I think the closest biblical parallel that we have to that is actually the second verse of the Bible. Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void, the tohu and the bohu, this basically completely chaotic state. And, you know, if you were reading this from any other worldview, you'd say that's chaos. And then out of the chaos, you see that the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the waters, and then what happens? And really, in some ways, the rest of the Bible is a commentary on verse 2 of the Bible. So,
and the word translated deep there is Tehom, which is an Akkadian cognate for Tiamat, which was their version of the chaos, primordial chaos monster.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So really, in a way, to talk about this is to begin with the sea, you know, as one of the strongest symbols in all of the ancient Near East of chaos, and then serpentine image, and then, you know, the seven-headed dragon or whatever, the sea dragon. But yeah, and I mean, you know, there's plenty of verses too that talk about, you know, the sea the sea was raging. I don't have them on my fingertips, but Psalms and stuff that talks about the sea raging, the Gentiles raged, and so there's all kinds of likening of the sea to anything that is like against, at least biblically speaking, for sure. Anything that's against God, Yahweh, or his people is often linked to the sea. And the sea is, think about it, even still today, it's still a mysterious, dark world that represents an untamable reality for us. We can't tame that, right? Like, we can tame the land because we do a lot on the land, right? But we can't tame that sea. And so in the ancient world, sea was very commonly used of chaos. The Jews would use it of Gentiles, the negative, but it's also a tie-in of the sea with the wilderness in the scriptures too, where the wilderness also is a symbol of chaos. And sometimes, it talks about the scriptures even talk about, and other Jewish literature talk about, Rahab the sea dragon, being thrown dead in the wilderness and its flesh is being eaten. And that's also another expression of overcoming the chaos of the wilderness or the sea or both, So there's definitely a tradition of a lot of imagery that's interwoven, in here. And it definitely behooves us to look at some of the specific examples of it, I'm sure, but not the least of which is the Job passage, which we have to address because in some ways, I don't think any of us here think that Leviathan of Job 41 is a dinosaur, right?
Or a crocodile.
Yeah, or a crocodile or a hippopotamus. But still, we're laughing, but I do think we should address that because there are a lot of Christians who still do. Because when you read Job 41, it is very explicit and detailed. It's very detailed, and that's one of the arguments that say no, it's a literal creature, not a symbolic one. Talks about
his sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth.
Yeah, and God brags about fly fishing and catching the Leviathan. He's like, can you pull this thing in and pull the hook out? So it's pretty clear. It's not some land quadruped dinosaur. We're talking about something else here.
Yeah, not even a sea dinosaur because, like that passage you read, it's very clearly fire breathing. And
yeah.
I guess there's always going to be, as Christians, where we do believe that God is supernatural and he can do anything, but there comes a point where one of my ongoing arguments is, yeah, God does miracles, but he doesn't do absurdities. And I think that's an absurdity to suggest that a fish can have fire breathing because the water would put it out. You know what I'm saying? And he's using traditional forms there, coals, boiling pot, flame. And so, to me, one of the strong things that says these details, yeah, it's detailed, but there are a lot of details on Daniel's monsters. There's a lot of detail on the Revelation sea beast, which I would argue is another Leviathan creature, right? And so, just because there are details in my mind doesn't necessarily mean it's literal, because it could still be very symbolic. And so, the flames impossibly could not work underwater. Now you could say, well, maybe there is a version of flame that can, but that becomes in my opinion, the God of the gaps thing where, you're just trying to fill in empty things, But there are other elements too that make it impossible, such as his there's no air between his scales, and that literally that creature couldn't move if that was the case, right? So these kinds of elements point in that direction of, yeah, he's using a detailed description, but it's symbolic of that monstrous chaos that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think whether you believe it's, for those who do believe that it's literal, and, you can come and say that, well, the whole list of animals up until the behemoth are literal animals, so why not those two? You can make arguments for that. Yeah. But what I don't see people doing who take the literal view of those last two creatures saying hardly ever is the mythological part of it, which is the point.
Yeah.
These are chaos monsters, whether it's the one on land or the one in the sea. And to miss that because we are so insistent that we need to find proof that it existed somewhere, misses the forest for the trees.
Yeah, in fact, that was my conclusion in my book, which is available on Amazon, called Leviathan and Behemoth. And so I wrote a little booklet on that. But I wrote that. Let's see, what do I have here? He's I lost my place here. He was left alone. So so this idea of like what you're saying, Doug, I agree that even if you do, and that's what I said, even if you do believe that, if you read it in context and you read the other passages where Leviathan shows up.
And Rahab even earlier in the book of Job, because she's almost the exact same thing. Sometimes Rahab and Leviathan are parallel.
Yes. So, but what I was going to say was this Leviathan shows up in multiple places. And at the Red Sea crossing in Psalm 74, he's crushed and eaten. Then he shows up again in Isaiah 51 in some eschatological future, right? And then
Isaiah 27.
27 one, yeah. And then, of course, Leviathan shows up again in Revelation 12 as the dragon who's Satan, right? And so the fact that he appears and then is killed and appears and is killed, that should be also I think a clue to people how symbolic the meaning really is.
Well, I think that Brian, that point's well taken. I think that's sort of echoed in chaos monsters like the Typhon, and I guess you could argue to a point that the Hydra is kind of a stylized iteration of that. But you chop one of its heads off, and another one comes back, and you can. It's this push pull between chaos and order. You can impose order, but chaos is always going back.
Amen.
You brought up Revelation 12 there, Brian, and you talked about the sea and the wilderness, and Revelation 12 makes me think of the one other place that we have chaos, which is the heavens. And in that chapter, it's a third of the stars are falling from the sky, and sometimes the Leviathan is related directly to the serpent eating its tail, the Ouroboros. I was talking with Judd about this last night. Like, the Ouroboros being a mythological depiction of the Milky Way, full of stars. That seems to be a third realm of chaos. But now here we have, this is the realm of the gods specifically. So I think that everything but the land seems to me, and even actually parts of the land are chaos, but everything but the parts that we've been able to somehow culture, are chaotic, and I don't know what to make of that. It's interesting.
I think it's interesting that you reference Revelation 12 and the seven-headed dragon that is Satan as chaos. I've tended to view the beast that comes from the sea in Revelation 13, the Antichrist, as chaos.
Yeah, that too.
Is it possible?
In fact, while we're there, let's address that. Seven-headed dragon, seven-headed beast out of the sea. Seven it can be a symbolic number, but it's interesting that the history of Leviathan does have many heads. The Leviathan of the Canaanite culture was called Lotan, which is Canaanite for Leviathan, and he had 7 heads. And he was the creature also that, Baal also subdued. And so you get this multiple head thing. And, one of my favorite passages is Psalm 74, because that is that's a passage that's talking about the Red Sea, the dividing of the Red Sea. And it says in verse 13, you, Yahweh, divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads, plural, of Leviathan, singular, right? You gave them as food for the creatures of the wilderness, et cetera, et cetera. And the context of that is the Red Sea crossing. And there you have multiple concepts going on here. You've got the chaos that he parts out in the sea is both the sea and Leviathan are spoken of, but it says multiple heads. now in the Old Testament, we don't see anything about 7 heads that I know of, but that at least supports the multiple head concept, right? And that was one of the passages that really blew my mind when I first learned it, because that's what opened my mind up more to understanding this sea dragon concept. And then it talks about you gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. That's a theme that the Second Temple Jews picked up. There's a lot of their apocalyptic literature where they eat the bodies of Behemoth and Leviathan in the wilderness as symbols of their victory that God gives them. And that's tied in with the Red Sea. And then what you were talking about there earlier, Doug, the connection to Egypt, right? That also you could see Pharaoh as being the symbolic connection there to Leviathan or Egypt, whatever. But it's sort of, and that's the chaos they were leaving of Egypt to go into the promised land of God's order. And right after this event, they went to Sinai and got God's covenanted order. So one of the themes that I, like to address, and I do in all my novels, is this notion that in the ancient world, the god or gods would conquer the sea dragon to establish their order. Babylon has the same, like you mentioned, Tiamat, and the concept was they destroy the chaos monster to establish their order. And that was them saying, our God is the God that rules. And it's no different with Israel. They use the same imagery to say the same thing, but they're saying Yahweh is God, not these other gods, And seeing that connection really became a really beautiful thing. And that's why I ended up having Leviathan in all my novels, because he was, in fact, other than God, he's the only other one that is in every single one of my novels, because he is the chaos that Yahweh's fighting against. And I use him he's in the spiritual realm and all this kind of stuff. But that's the idea that I love to see, is how God, like the Hydra, in some ways he comes back, but God keeps pushing him back, and he does it with ease. It's like it's nothing for God. It's almost a snap of the finger.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we see it in Genesis 1, verse 2, it's like God saying, down, boy. And, it's not destroyed, but subdued, in the same way that the sons of God from Genesis 6 are described as being in chains and gloomy darkness by Peter and Judd. They've not been destroyed, but they will be someday. And Isaiah 27 says, on that day, which is a reference to the day of Yahweh, if you're not a, preterist.
So here's a question for you guys. So you've got the Baal cycle, where Baal is defeating Yam, and Yam is the sea. And so sea is certainly, very closely related to this whole idea of chaos. But on another level, you have people like Ninurta or Hercules, who are demigods, and rather than, the Watchers, for whatever you want to call them, who are, they're not defeating the sea, but they're defeating the monster in the sea, the 7-headed sea monster. So it's interesting, Brian, you brought up Yahweh defeating he defeats both the sea and the sea monster, kind of putting him in both of those realms. What do you guys think of the differences between those two things, with regard to the sea and the sea monster, but also with regard to the Watcher versus the demigod sort of a thing? And then how does that relate to what the Bible says about God, defeating chaos?
Can we read too much into the Hebrew word for sea being Yam, the same name as the chaos monster, the Canaanite chaos monster?
Is the chaos? Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, Yam is but Yam is one of the 70, isn't he? One of the 70 sons of God. So it's like Baal's defeating his brother, is what I thought.
Well, the problem is that the word for sea, Yam, is used for sea. It's not, it is used for just a general designation of the sea, but that's not to say the scriptures do personify the sea in different passages. Sure. So I would have no problem with when that personification is used. It's a spiritual symbol or metaphor, or what God is doing in the spiritual realm. Why not? I
mean, that's where I was looking at Psalm 74, where God divides the sea, divides Yam by his might.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. And so I guess same thing with Daniel 7, with the sea and the monster coming right out of it. They're almost the same thing.
Yeah. But since there's a lull here, I will go back to Isaiah 27. I want about preterism.
Thanks for filling it back in, Brian.
In that day, the Lord with his hard, great, and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, which, by the way, we all know that phrase is exactly the same wording as is used of Lotan in the Canaanite culture.
Right.
So there is literally a connection there going on.
Quoting the Baal cycle. Yeah.
Yes. And he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. And it does depend on how you're interpreting those passages when they apply. But what I said earlier about when God establishes his covenanted order, don't forget that from my perspective, when God establishes the new covenant, he is destroying the old covenant, obliterating it, and establishing his new covenant order. So that's how I see those passages related to the first century, if they are applied in that way. Now, I'm certainly not settled on all my interpretations on this stuff, but there is that application of that passage. But the concept's still the same, isn't it? I mean, whether you believe it's in the distant future or not, it's that elimination of chaos and the establishment of God's order, right?
You said that earlier, that it's the establishment of a new order for a new kingdom coming along. The new gods are going to do it. So that doesn't say anything about what might have happened before that in those mythologies. So I think it's a really important point you're making there, Brian.
I do too. And just to follow up with that, I think that there's some imagery even within baptism itself as part of the imagery of the new covenant, is that you're being plunged under the water. I mean, we all know about the testimony of baptism. It's not the salvific thing, but it's a testimony of your acceptance of Jesus, of the faith, the new covenant. But water is such a key element there. That a person is plunged, and it has all this imagery about dying and being brought back and saved by Jesus. But a further layer of meaning is that this is like the final defeat of chaos, and it's represented in the imagery of baptism as plunged under the chaotic waters and then brought back out.
Yeah,
and it lends all kinds of interesting connotations to Peter being called out from the boat, and then he's surrounded by the swirling water. So, and I think, Derek, you've hit on that in the past, but I think that baptism is part of the equation here, just in terms of that imagery of the final defeat of chaos with the new covenant.
Well, and as Mike Heiser has pointed out, and was very happy to be there where he was able to teach on this right at the Jordan River. Brian, you were there too, I think.
Yeah.
And somebody actually videoed that, by the way, with their phone and put it up on the web. Cool. So that was really awesome, because I've been able to steal that and use it elsewhere, because it's such wonderful imagery when Jesus goes down and proclaims to the spirits in prison, 1 Peter 3, beginning at verse 18, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. And then he goes on in verse 21, baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He's connecting that, that watery destruction of the old way to essentially a declaration of victory over those spirits when Jesus went down and proclaimed to those spirits.
Good point.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I will. This is kind of what I think could be almost a climax, but I think it's important. It's a good place to say it, because I don't know how is this going to end. I have no idea. So you look at Revelation and you look at the sea, and then this progression from the sea of glass, which is imagery that harkens really to the Red Sea congealing, to this sea of glass mixed with fire, which has this almost judgment element in it. And that's very much like the stream of fire in Daniel 7. And so you're kind of standing before the judgment throne. And then at the end of the book, you have the beast and the false prophet and those without their names in the book of life, and death and Hades. They're all thrown into this lake of fire. And that's the other side of baptism people don't think about or talk about a whole lot, is that the whole world was baptized in Noah's day, but only 8 of them came out alive. The rest of them were given over to the chaos. And so you see that same thing in Revelation 20, that the victory that's going on in Revelation is that God is giving all these things over to the chaos. But the very last time that the sea is mentioned is in, I think, chapter 21. Right after this, it says there was no more sea.
Yeah, the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more.
Is no more. Yeah, and so that's the ending of the Bible that started in verse 2 of Genesis, with this watery, chaotic, what is going on, and now at the very end, there's no more sea because the chaos has been dealt with.
We're tracking there. We've in our book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, Sharon and I argued that chaos is the first enemy God confronts and the last one to be defeated.
Yeah. Well, death, right? Isn't death the last defeated?
Well, this death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire, and then following that, there's the new heaven and the new earth, and the sea is no more.
Yeah, so
and the sea is no more. That's right.
Yeah, part of that. But it's interesting too, because you're saying that about baptism, and the baptism is in a lake of fire. In other words, those will be judged are judged by fire as well, which harkens back to Jesus's phrase when he says he will baptize you with Holy Spirit and fire. And I know Pentecostals tend to interpret that as both the same thing, and it's like the flames of fire in the head or whatever. But fire is basically and usually it means either purification or judgment, or right. But in this case, he's talking about clear, unquenchable fire being burned, and so it's clearly judgment. And so that's that you're either baptized in the Holy Spirit with water, or you're going to be baptized in judgment of fire.
This gets back to what we were talking about last month with the region of the region of Bashan and what was connected to all of that, and the name again, Bashan, Bashmu, being a cognate for one version of this 7-headed chaos monster. Jesus began his ministry, was baptized, while we're talking about baptism, according to John. John 1, verse 28, John was baptizing at Bethany across the Jordan, which since at least 1877 now, some scholars have said, that Greek Bethania was probably a transliteration of Batania, which means Bashan. So he was baptizing at Bashan across the Jordan. When you look at where the dolmens are located in the Golan Heights, they're basically clustered just north of the Sea of Galilee. And there's a megalithic monument there similar to Gilgal Rephaim overlooking the Jordan River about a half a mile from Bethsaida, which is where Jesus called his first 3 disciples. But there's an Israeli scholar by the name of Baruch Margalit, who wrote a book, a commentary on the Ugaritic epic of Akhat, A-Q-H-A-T. That's the young man who's given a magic bow by the craftsman god, and the war goddess wants it, and he tells her, forget it, you're a woman, what are you going to do with it? So, big mistake. She has him killed, and the father, whose name is Daniel, says 3 times in this epic, I will, when I find my son, I will weep and I will mourn for him. I will mourn and I will bury him in a hole for the Chthonian gods, or the underworld gods, the Elohim Eretz, in other words, the Rephaim, essentially. The 4th time this comes around, he finds the remains of his son, and he says, I will mourn for him and I will bury him in a tomb for the underworld gods at Kinneret, which is the Sea of Galilee. So Margalit, in his commentary, concluded that the abode of El, the Canaanite creator god, which is located at the source of the 2 deeps, or the double deep, is in the vicinity of, in Margalit's words, or underneath the Sea of Galilee. So if El, who is replaced at the top of the pantheon by Baal, who I believe is connected to Molech, if he's not Molech himself, Rapayu, the king of eternity, who's mentioned as connected with the region of Bashan, we may have one of the entities responsible for that rebellion in Mount Hermon that created the Nephilim, the demons, and then Jesus going out, first of all, going there to be baptized, declaring his divinity at Caesarea Philippi at the base of Mount Hermon, and then, as Judd, you pointed out, going out and, calling Peter from the boat, walking across the water, stilling the storm, all on the Sea of Galilee. This was like a shaming, or another reminder of chaos, or to chaos, who's really in control.
So you suggest
and you
go for it, Judd.
You're exactly right. I'm sorry about that. We're all eager to jump. You're right about the linguistic carryover. I talked about that in a dissertation a little bit about the Bashan over to the Hellenic and the Latinized forms, Britannia. It's just all right there, hiding in plain sight. Linguists.
Wow.
So you're suggesting, to get the kind of the storyline of this, of why you're bringing up the geography here. So you're suggesting that the realm of the Sea of Galilee and then to the north and the east is really the realm of chaos, that whole area.
Death and chaos,
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Death and chaos, right. So that's kind of another piece to add to the whole reason of why it's so important that Jesus keeps going up to the north. Why would you need to keep doing that? Several reasons. The Gentiles, the realm of death, the realm of chaos, the realm of the origin of this supernatural battle that's going on. There's so much going on there.
Well, even the Greeks, when you're thinking further north, Mount Saphon, where Zeus fought the battle with the chaos monster Typhon. There are a number of scholars who believe that the name of that chaos monster Typhon is derived from Saphon.
Saphon, yeah. Mm.
So clearly, this concept of chaos was really, really important, not just to in the Bible, but to the pagans and in their cosmologies as well.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson talks about it too.
Well, do share. I don't think I've heard him talk about this.
Oh yeah. No, he's talked a lot about that, and like in his Bible study material as well. But I think that I think that's one of the quintessential elements of the ancient mind is precisely that it was one of the strongest components of all of their thought forms of that world, chaos, and what it was that the gods fought against and what they were fighting against, and I would argue too that it's certainly implicit in the cultural mandate, where man is called by God to bring order to the natural world, and we do that through use of technology. We do that through whether it's agriculture, machines, all this stuff that we do to tame culture in order to benefit for humanity, to create human flourishing, in a way that's that image of God that we are also creating order out of the chaos of nature that is around them. And it's interesting because there's in terms of the environmental debate and stuff today, Alex Epstein has a new book out called Fossil Future. And in it, he argues, he's an atheist, but I've read this book, and it's like he's arguing for the Genesis notion of humanity using technology and machines, etc., to fight the chaos of nature, because nature is not the pagan mindset, which is today, and this is all relevant, I guess. The pagan mindset, people don't realize, like, environmentalism is literally paganism, because it is the notion that nature is the what did he use it? It's the delicate nurturer, right? And that's their concept that they use. And so humanity is the virus, we cause the pain, right? And it's literally the opposite of the Judeo-Christian worldview, which was, no, nature is actually wild chaos. And mankind brings technology, the cultural mandate, to harness nature for the good of humanity, and that reflects God. We bring order to the chaos. I think that's beautiful and powerful, but it's also like, it's the argument. That's what blows my mind when I was reading this. Like, this guy's making a better argument than many Christians have made against the environmentalism as a pagan religion. And he doesn't see it. He doesn't necessarily. I think he may make some references to it metaphorically, but it's not as important to him, obviously, as it would be to us. That hey, what you're describing there is literally pagan religion.
That's a really interesting aspect of it. as a theological point, we as Christians are ordered by God. When Adam and Eve were created, be fruitful and multiply and take dominion of the earth, to be good stewards of what God created here. We are to impose order as his moral agents on earth.
Yeah, learning that was what clicked in my mind when I began to understand the true spiritual nature, because I'd struggled a lot with environmental arguments, and I want to be a good steward. And doesn't the Bible say to be a good steward? But when you realize the worldview from which they're operating is not that view. And it, it's the same thing with critical race theory. There's always these surface things that seem to be, that's good, compassion or whatever, right? But it's understanding the underlying worldview that helps us, understand the true spiritual war that's going on there.
It's almost like the biblical worldview wants to see the Garden of Eden, which is the creating of culture and the harnessing of nature, creating it something that's beautiful and workable and usable and honoring to God. And the pagan worldview is almost it's almost like it's relishing in the tohu and the bohu.
Yeah.
The chaos. And so when you see a culture that's like ours just disintegrating so rapidly, as it gives up objective truth and as it gives up, as it talks about lies and hides and obscures and obfuscates on words and the return to paganism in so many different ways that we're seeing. Like we're headed back towards chaos. We're not headed toward. It's the opposite, and those are worldviews in collision. They're incompatible things.
Yeah, it's like Satan's attack. It's like seeing the biblical connections is what helps me on a lot of these things, because it's like you'll also hear environmentalists when they start saying, and people say this, not just people who believe in Gaia. A lot of them don't believe in Gaia necessarily, but they all use the same language where it's, nature is now fighting back because of what we did to her. That's the pagan deity that is angry that we have to appease by sacrificing human lives, getting rid of population, right? It's all like, it really is religious, And the other component that you were mentioning that struck me was the language thing, how everything is devolving into chaos by the denial of distinctions. So in Genesis, when God establishes his order, it's all distinctions, right? Sky, sea, man, woman, man, beast, et cetera, light, dark. The holiness paradigm there is separation is what is God's created order. And so by trying to break down that separation, a man can become a woman can become a man. There is no difference, all those components are, I see it as a direct attack on Genesis, on the God of the Bible and his created order. And I'm not one of those, I don't tend to see myself as like a person who sees the spiritual in everything, but I'm becoming more like that as I see more of these connections for sure. Maybe one day
that's why I brought up the point of chaos in the Greek pantheon, right? That how can you have chaos at the top of your pantheon? And how is that not exactly the same thing that we're seeing with atheism at the top of their worldview? Like these are directly overlapping. So it's funny that the people who don't worship Gaia, like you said, and they think of themselves as scientists and whatever, it's funny how totally similar they are to the ancient worldview that's so supernatural that it calls chaos a god.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the fuel behind this, all the ideological fuel behind it is Hegelian dialectics. That's what they want to do is to let chaos take back over, to let the synthesis, as it were, this sort of artificial synthesis that they're creating. But what's interesting about it is you see a lot of those same kind of concepts also echoed in thaumaturgy, higher ritual magic and Hermetic magic in particular. the corruption of concepts and I think we've talked about this before. At least I know. I think I've talked about it with all of you individually about the corruption of the concept of as above, so below. Jesus lays that out, and when the disciples ask him how to pray, as it is in heaven, on earth as it is in heaven. And I think more and more, and I reference Hegel because of the kind of cognitive dissonance that sort of philosophy teaches. And I mean, look around us. We're already seeing. You pointed out, Brian. Now a man can be a woman. Now a woman can be a man. Now a man can give birth, and get female medical care. Just these. Orwell called it doublethink, but that's what it is. It's this holding this position consciously, and then a completely anathema one subconsciously. And so this sort of tension, it doesn't exist without the struggle between order and chaos. But it's the trajectory for the satanic agenda, of course, the Luciferian agenda is chaos, because we know what team they're batting for.
That's one of the things that surprised Josh Peck and me when we were researching our book on the UFO phenomenon back in 2017, The Day the Earth Stands Still, that when Aleister Crowley shuffled off this motor coil and was illuminated into the reality of the supernatural realm, his personal assistant, Kenneth Grant, took over his magical system and developed it further. He took Thelema and said that he detected a set Sirius current, Sirius the star, in Crowley's magic. And so he took Thelema and developed a new strain of this ritual magic that he called the Typhonian tradition, chaos magic. And there's Austin Osman Spare is another who was connected to Crowley about 100 years ago, also developed the idea of using sigils for chaos magic. So that's a real interesting aspect of the UFO phenomenon that we didn't expect to run across, because according to Grant, who believed that Crowley and H.P. Lovecraft were drawing from the same supernatural source, which is really interesting, because when you follow then the work of Lovecraft, the horror fiction author from the 20s and 30s, his work was essentially repackaged by Eric von Daniken into Chariots of the Gods. Wow. This idea of chaos magic is really a thing. Yeah. What's interesting is that the researcher who put that together is not a believer. He probably would be upset that I used his work, Jason Colavito. But it's well documented.
Probably all familiar with him.
Yeah, but it's well documented. It's you take Lovecraft, you filter it through a couple of French science fiction authors from the early '60s, Powles and Bergier, who wrote a book called Morning of the Magicians or Dawn of the Magicians or something like that, and von Daniken rewrote that so closely that they sued him, and he had to settle. But yeah, it's basically repackaged Lovecraft, and he was drawing from Crowley and Helena Blavatsky. So, but Grant, again, who was personal assistant to Crowley, believed that Lovecraft, Crowley, drawing from the same source, Crowley's magic developed by Grant and others into modern chaos magic, with this idea that there's something coming from the vicinity of the star Sirius and coming this way. And isn't it interesting that Sirius is was the name of the documentary that the guy behind the big Dr. Stephen Greer put out here recently about official disclosure. Mm. So, and the two main organizations trying to find or make connection with extraterrestrial intelligence is SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is Greer's organization. Both named for, Seti, which was the Egyptian name that means man of Set, man of the chaos god. So, it does seem to be what the fallen realm, or those who are on that side of the field are cheering for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we've really covered this territory fairly well tonight. I mean, we could go deeper if we wanted to get into really into the academic weeds, but just some final closing thoughts. Brian, you've written the most about this, about specifically the subject of chaos and Leviathan. What relevance is this to us as Christians today?
Yeah, no, good point. But I think when we got off on the discussion that we just had, environmentalism and what's going on in society today, it shows that this is still relevant. I do, as people who love theology, all of us here, we can be head cases sometimes. We can be, stuck into the intellectual quagmire of scholarship and reading and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm always concerned that I don't become swallowed up by that. But I think, though, that those who avoid this material, like seeking to understand Leviathan imagery throughout the Bible, I think we're proving that it's part of God's beauty to use symbols, images, metaphors, whatever you want to call it, the imagination. He uses these to communicate his theological truth, and it reflects truth about who he is. And so knowing this material, learning it, and seeing God through those eyes of that, understand how the sea is the chaos, and God created established his order at Sinai, and that's a kind of like fighting the sea dragon or whatever. As an artist, I have always believed that the understanding and pursuing just to understand the beauty in God's word, whether it's understanding the poetry, the poetic language, or the symbols, it doesn't have to just be head knowledge. It opens up, I think, a picture of God that connects us spiritually in a way that rational doctrinal teaching does not. I'm not saying it's bad or right or wrong. I'm saying there are two different ways of connecting to God. One of them might be through doctrinal truths, understanding the Trinity or whatever, but also these understanding these mythological. That's a scary word to a lot of Christians, but whatever. The imaginative elements of God, the poetic elements of God, symbolic elements. To seek to understand those symbols is a pursuit of God, in my opinion. Because when you begin to understand them, your heart, when I learn these connections, or even, things that you say, Derek, where you're making these revelations of the connections of Rephaim, and I was like, I didn't see that before, and it's opening up the picture of that supernatural world in a clearer way, and that in and of itself is a spiritual growth. Now, I do believe, we have to act upon these things, and what are we doing to change the world? But I guess I'm just making an argument for the beauty of God as being embodied in these symbolic things we're talking about, and that Christians should not be ashamed, should not be afraid, should not avoid them as if they're not important, because they are. And of course, the one step deeper is what we talk a lot about, which is it is an opening up of the supernatural reality that we're not aware of. And that itself as well is part of the package for sure.
Doug, as a pastor, how do you communicate these concepts and ideas to your congregation?
I try and tackle them head on and just blunt as possible. I've learned a lot from Brian and what he just said. Seriously, Brian, your take on this and the way that you approach it is so different and so refreshing and helpful to people.
Amen.
And I really appreciate your work.
Thanks, man.
And I've used it. I don't know how many people quote novels from a guy named Brian Godow in their sermons, but I've done it many times. So. It's important to tackle this stuff head on, to give people the framework to be able to think about it theologically. And then, adding what he just said, that there's more ways of learning about God and his world than just the theology, but to not be afraid to talk about these things and to study them, to look into them, I was thinking about the whole idea of Antichrist and the beast and Leviathan and Revelation as it regards this. And, it seems to me that chaos really in some ways is the embodiment of everything. It's Antichrist. And so when people, we've got, I think, pretty much all the millennial perspectives covered in this little group. And so we're all going to be pulling in our own listeners. And I think the one thing that we all share is we all believe that there's Antichrist. And as we think about it eschatologically, we should be understanding that, the point from the beginning of Genesis to Revelation, whichever covenant we're in, new covenant, old covenants, whatever, it's about God overcoming this Antichrist thing that we call chaos, and he wins, and he cuts his new covenant, and there's nothing that can stop it. And so by the, like I said, by the time you get to the end of Revelation, there's no more sea, and it's just it's a great story that isn't told the way that I think we're talking about it tonight very often.
Yeah, Judd, final thoughts?
Well, I think as we look at the biblical narrative, it gets really easy to be kind of I'm trying to think of a way to say it, Sunday schoolish all the time about it, because I'm guilty of it too. Not that there's anything wrong with Sunday school. We certainly want that. Discipleship is important, but there's such a shimmering quality, if I can use an artistic description of the narrative, that you turn every page, and it's just not about earning a gold star for memorizing scripture. It's about digging in as deeply as you possibly can, because that digging is represented in verses like, when God says, if you draw close to me, I'll draw close to you. And I think we've all pointed that out tonight. As we do that, as we dig into the relevance of mythology in the Bible, and how God utilizes it, I think that's an important ministerial facet for the times that we're living in, because as we've articulated each in our own way with our own experiences and training tonight, that these concepts, about chaos, about driving order against chaos, and this is this big cosmic struggle, that we're in. I was telling somebody, in the rehab center today, or the other day, just about that. It's not, we can sit here and watch Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and think, oh, that's great escapism, but we're stuck right in the middle of the real thing. And if that's exciting to me. I believe we were made for times such as this, and I think if our brothers and sisters in the church can grasp onto that in some way, shape, or form, then people like us are doing our job not only for the job's sake, but because God called us to do it. And to me, that's very exciting.
I will say again, because I've said this publicly before, one of my favorite scenes ever read in a novel was the scene in Noah Primeval with Methuselah and Tubal-Cain basically surfing into their doom, but doing so with joy, knowing that they were giving their lives for a greater cause. That this was like a Lord of the Rings moment. I don't often stand and cheer when I read a novel, but it was like, Sharon, let me read this to you.
Cool.
So being able to communicate that, Brian, is a real gift. And we recommend your work a lot, because I think Judd is right on the money. This is an epic struggle, but most of us in the church are blind to it because we've not been taught that these entities are real, and we don't see them perfectly. Like Paul, we're looking into a mirror in a darkened room, but we at least are trying to make some sense out of it and communicate this excitement to others without coming across like Kevin McCarthy in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They're here! So hopefully with a little more dignity and a little more artistry than that. But we start with that. God took these things seriously. Jesus certainly took these things seriously. So we, his followers, should as well. I really appreciate you guys and enjoy these monthly sessions. We'll do this again next month. Dr. Judd Burton, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa. Find their links to the websites in the show notes, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. Guys, thanks again for your time tonight, and we'll do this again soon. Again, check the show notes, VFTB.net, or wherever else you're consuming this podcast, video or audio. We encourage you to take advantage of our free mobile app. That's really the best way and the easiest way to get all of our content from here in Gilbert House. And that's the name of our ministry, but that's also where we produce all of this stuff. We just realized we got like 3 rooms in our house now that are devoted to recording various types of audio and video, which is weird, but that's what we do. So you'll find the link at VFTB.net. It's in the top menu bar. You can also find it at gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org/app. That is the link to get you the free mobile app. And really, gilberthouse.org is the web hub for everything that Sharon and I do. So you'll find everything linked from there. Also reference, information about our travels, both next spring to Israel and next fall to Turkey. And we've got some exciting news about that we'll be releasing here in the weeks and months ahead. We've got a couple of conferences to tell you about. There is another one that I can't really disclose yet, a virtual conference that you'll want to take advantage of in the near future. The Go Therefore conference, we're back from Ohio, the Harvest Revival Center, Pastor Neil Peterson. Wonderful conference. Some great presentations. Dr. Michael Lake, dynamic as always. We just so many good friends there. Casper McLeod, Coach Dave Daubenmeyer, Tom Dunn. We were talking, Tom and Sharon and me, about how really the first conference that we ever spoke at was the conference that Tom organized in Canton, Ohio, more than 10 years ago, the Supernatural Science and Prophecy Conference, which is also where we met Tom Horn for the first time. So who knew where all of this was going to lead? Wonderful conference, but you can still take advantage of the streaming video, I believe. GoThereforeConference.com. My presentation felt good, and it was kind of neat having the really big screen for the slides behind me, so I was able to use it almost like a weatherman pointing to the map, because I had a number of maps there to make some points regarding Jesus and where he chose to be baptized, where he chose to relocate after John the Baptist was arrested, settling in Capernaum, which was the fulfillment of prophecy according to the Apostle Matthew. So if you haven't seen it, again, I think at GoThereforeConference.com, you can still take advantage of the streaming video, because Dr. Mike Spalding, Mike and Kathy, who coordinated the conference, basically making the videos available forever. So it's not like a 90-day window. You get the access to the videos. You can watch them as long as you want. So GoThereforeConference.com, and we hope we can go back there again next year. That was a lot of fun. Conference now, finally got some good information here, and this is not to say anything negative about the folks organizing the conference. We're all scrambling and wearing multiple hats, but I had been making some assumptions about the conference, and you will see in the programs that I've pre-recorded for the next couple of Sundays, the 21st and the 28th, interviews coming up with a couple of fascinating guests, one first-timer and one who has not been on the program in 9 years. I mentioned a guest who I thought was going to be speaking at this conference, and turns out I was misinformed. I'm talking about the Dark Secrets and Bright Hopes Conference coming up just over a month now, September 16th through 18th in Live Oak, California. That is just north of Yuba City, which is north of Sacramento. It's about 45 minutes from Sacramento. L.A. Marzulli will be speaking. I will be speaking. Dr. Brian Ardis will be there. He's been very outspoken about the whole pandemic affair. I had been under the impression that Tim Alberino was going to be there, so I misspoke. So I apologize if any of you were interested in attending the conference, hoping to see Tim. Tim's schedule is chock full at the moment, so was not available. But between L.A., me, and I've prepared 3 presentations. Don't know what the schedule is yet. I don't know if they'll be giving 3 presentations, but I've got 3 at the ready. And Dr. Brian Artis, looking forward to meeting him. And, of course, Pastor Dave Bryan. I just know him by reputation. He's a deliverance minister, very dynamic, and so this should be a great gathering at the Church of Glad Tidings. You can find out more at their website, churchofgladtidings.com. Again, September 16th through 18th. Our Israel tour, that'll be next March 19th through 30th of 2023. We will be, in a way, we're sorry we've not been able to get back to Israel the last few years. But when we go back this time, we have had the opportunity to do so much research that will apply to the places we will go that we are really champing at the bit for this one. And you can join us. We've still got room on the tour. You can find out more at gilberthouse.org/travel, gilberthouse.org/travel. And there are links there to the Lipkin Tours website where you can get a look at the itinerary, reserve your spot on the tour. We've even got links to our travelogumentaries, to borrow a phrase coined by Aaron Judkins. If you want to stream that video, it's a couple hours out of your day, but it gives you a pretty good look at what you would see on the tour. And so we're looking forward to getting back over there next March. Again, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen, whether it's at the website, through your friendly podcatcher, YouTube, or on our free mobile app. If you're listening and checking this out, do remember you can subscribe at the website, VFTB.net. We are everywhere that podcasts are available. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. And our announcer is the inimitable DC Good. View from the Bunker production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.